I never should have agreed to the mission. But when you're in charge, the weight of those decisions presses down on you like the ocean above, miles thick. You tell yourself it'll be routine. Just another dive into the abyss. Another chance to prove you can handle the unknown. But this was different from the start. We'd lost contact with the first crew 3 days ago. Experienced divers, specialists. They'd gone down into the Mariana Trench following up on strange sonar readings, something metallic, deep down where nothing man-made should be. When the comms went silent, the higher-ups got nervous. I don't blame them. There's no telling what's hiding in those depths. So they sent us in a search and recover mission, standard protocol. I told myself it'd be fine. After all, we'd faced worse, right? The trench wasn't exactly new to us, but something about this particular descent, it didn't sit right. I could feel it even before we submerged. I never should have agreed to the mission. But when you're in charge, the weight of those decisions presses down on you like the ocean above, miles thick. You tell yourself it'll be routine. Just another dive into the abyss. Another chance to prove you can handle the unknown. But this was different from the start. We'd lost contact with the first crew 3 days ago. Experienced divers, specialists. They'd gone down into the Mariana Trench following up on strange sonar readings, something metallic, deep down where nothing man-made should be. When the comms went silent, the higher-ups got nervous. I don't blame them. There's no telling what's hiding in those depths. So they sent us in a search and recover mission, standard protocol. I told myself it'd be fine. After all, we'd faced worse, right? The trench wasn't exactly new to us, but something about this particular descent, it didn't sit right. I could feel it even before we submerged. We were 4 in total. Me, James, Mia, and Will. Will was the youngest, still a bit green but sharp. He'd been eager to prove himself, and I figured this would be his chance. James, on the other hand, had been on missions like this more times than I could count, steady as a rock, always focused. Mia was the brains behind our tech, running the scanners and equipment. Between the 3 of them, I trusted my team completely. We descended slowly, the lights from the submersible cutting narrow beams through the black water. The deeper we went, the more oppressive it became. You always feel it down there, the weight of the ocean pressing in, the silence thick and absolute. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just the pressure. There was something else, something lurking. I didn't mention it, of course. The last thing a captain does is spook his crew. Still, I could see it on their faces. James kept checking the monitors more than usual. Mia's hands trembled slightly as she calibrated the sonar, and even Will, normally so eager, was quiet. We were nearing the target area when the readings went wild. The sonar was picking up something massive, a structure far larger than we'd anticipated. "That's no shipwreck," Mia said, her voice a low whisper. "Whatever this is, it's ancient." And then we saw it. The lights hit the edge of what looked like a passage, carved into the rock of the ocean floor. It was too perfect, too deliberate to be natural. A tunnel, leading deep into the earth, no markings, no signs of life, just a dark, gaping maw waiting for us. James was the first to speak up. This isn't on any chart, no records of any facility down here." "Doesn't matter," I said, more to reassure myself than them. "We've got a job to do. The other team's down there somewhere. We'll bring them back." We moved the sub closer to the entrance, and that's when we noticed the debris. Broken gear, pieces of metal and plastic, scattered around the entrance. It was theirs, our lost crew. But there was no sign of them, just the wreckage of their equipment, half buried in the silt, like it had been there for years, not days. Something was wrong. I knew it. They wouldn't have just left their gear behind like that. I glanced at the others. They felt it too. Mia had gone pale, her eyes wide, darting back and forth, as if waiting for something to emerge from the dark. We entered the tunnel. I can't explain why we did. It felt like a trap, like we were walking into the jaws of something much larger than us. But the signal from their suits was still active, faint but there. We couldn't just turn back. The inside of the passage was smooth, unnervingly so, as if it had been designed, not eroded by time. The walls had a strange sheen to them, almost metallic, though there was no rust, no sign of decay. Just silence. We pressed deeper, the lights of the sub barely cutting through the darkness, illuminating only a few feet ahead, and then we came upon it. A massive chamber, far larger than anything we'd expected. The floor was littered with debris, more broken equipment, wires, old cables. But the real shock came when our lights caught the far wall. Pods, dozens of them lined up like something out of a nightmare, their surfaces slick and dark, faintly reflecting the glow of our lights. They were huge, far too large for anything human to fit inside, and they hummed, just barely audible, a low rhythmic pulse, like the sound of something alive, breathing in the depths of sleep. We stopped, frozen in place, staring at the pods. This wasn't a facility, this was something else, something ancient and wrong. Mia's voice broke the silence. "Captain, what are we looking at?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew. This was no rescue mission anymore. This was something much worse, and we had just walked right into it. The moment we saw those pods, something shifted in the air, an unspoken tension settling over us like a thick fog. I could feel it, an ancient presence, something far beyond our understanding, lurking just beneath the surface of this place. Yet none of us said a word about leaving. We couldn't. Our missing crew was still out there, or so we told ourselves. And if they weren't, we needed to know what happened to them. I ordered us to push deeper into the chamber. Mia was still scanning the pods, her brow furrowed as she whispered to herself, trying to make sense of it all. James, usually unshakable, was clearly unsettled, his eyes darting to the far edges of the chamber, watching for any sign of movement. Will had his hands on his gear, his knuckles white, the excitement he'd felt at the beginning of the mission now replaced with a quiet, growing fear. As we moved further in, the hum from the pods became louder, more distinct. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, vibrating through the floor, pulsing through the walls. It was like the whole place was alive, aware of our presence. And the deeper we went, the more that feeling grew, like the walls themselves were watching us. "Look at this!" Mia's voice was barely above a whisper, but it echoed in the chamber. She had stopped in front of one of the pods, her scanner flickering as she adjusted the settings. "These things, they're connected. There's some kind of network running through the facility, linking everything together. It's biological and technological." I didn't like the way she said that. Biological and technological? That didn't make any sense. This place, it felt like it belonged to a time before us, but the technology Mia was describing was beyond anything we'd ever seen. I moved closer to one of the pods, shining my light over its surface. The material was slick and dark, like a hardened shell, but there was something organic about it, as if it had been grown rather than built. "Do you think they're alive?" Will's voice was shaky, almost hopeful, as if finding something living down here might somehow be better than the alternative. "I don't know." Mia's response was barely audible, her eyes glued to the readout on her scanner. "But whatever they are, they're not dormant. There's activity, movement, faint. But it's there. They're waiting." Waiting. The word sent a shiver down my spine. James, standing near the far wall, had been quiet the whole time. Too quiet. He suddenly straightened, his face pale as he pointed towards something in the corner of the chamber. "Captain, you might want to see this." I turned, following his gaze. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. There, half buried under a pile of debris, was a tangle of torn equipment, its edges jagged and twisted like it had been ripped apart by something powerful. And there, in the middle of the mess, was a helmet, a familiar one. It belonged to the first team. The realization hit us all at once. The gear scattered across the chamber wasn't just old equipment or leftover tech. It was what was left of them, of our missing crew, and there was no sign of them. Just the remnants of their suits, torn and twisted, as if something had shredded them like paper. Mia's voice trembled. "We need to go, Captain, now." She didn't need to say it twice. I gave the order to retreat, but as we turned to head back the way we came, something shifted in the air again. A low, resonating hum, much louder now, filled the chamber. The pods, they were waking up. I could see it, their surfaces pulsing faintly, a slow ripple of movement inside, as if whatever was in there had sensed us. James cursed under his breath, backing away from the nearest pod. "What the hell is happening, Captain?" "I don't know," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady, "but we're getting out of here." The moment we turned toward the corridor, the lights flickered, just for a second. A dimming, then a flash of darkness. Then they came back. But something was wrong. I felt it in my gut before I saw it. The entrance, the way out, it was gone. "What the—" Will stepped forward, panic in his voice. The tunnel was still there, but the walls had shifted. What had been a straight path was now a jagged, uneven labyrinth of rock and metal, like the place had closed in around us, trapping us inside. Mia's breathing quickened. "Captain, the readings are changing. The whole structure it's alive. It's reacting to us." I took a step forward, trying to steady myself, but the floor vibrated under my feet, as if the facility itself was pushing us deeper. There was no going back now. We were caught in its grip, and whatever was waiting for us ahead was waking up. "We need to move," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "We find another way out. Stay close." But deep down, I knew. There wasn't just one way out. There were none. We moved quickly, our lights flickering as the walls shifted around us. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and with it came a sound, soft, almost like breathing, echoing through the passages. Whatever had been asleep in this place, whatever had been waiting, was starting to stir, and we were too late to stop it. We moved quickly through the shifting corridors, the walls pressing in closer, as if the facility itself was guiding us deeper. The hum was constant now, vibrating through the air, rattling in our bones, and the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing echoed from the shadows around us. It felt like the place was alive, adapting to us, leading us somewhere. James stayed close to me, his face set in a hard, determined expression, but I could see the tension in his eyes. Mia was behind us, her scanner in hand, muttering to herself as she tried to make sense of the readings. Will was bringing up the rear, his head on a constant swivel, his breathing too fast, too shallow. I couldn't blame him. None of us were prepared for this. We kept moving, but the deeper we went, the more things started to change. The walls, once smooth and metallic, began to take on an odd texture, organic, almost fleshy. It was like we were inside a living organism, the structure pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm that matched the hum in the air. The dim glow of our lights flickered against the walls, casting long, twisted shadows that moved just out of sight, as if something was watching us from within the dark. Mia's voice broke the silence, her tone unsteady. "Captain, these readings, they don't make any sense. There's no central power source, but the whole facility is reacting like it's alive." "We can't focus on that now," I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. We need to find a way out. Anything on the scanners?" She shook her head. "No exits showing up. The pathways keep shifting. It's like the facility is growing." That word stuck with me. Growing. It didn't seem possible, but nothing about this place made sense. Every step forward felt like we were being funneled into something, guided deeper into whatever nightmare this was. My mind kept drifting back to those pods, to the things inside them, and the way they'd started to stir when we arrived. Had we triggered this by coming here? Was this place aware of us? Will spoke up, his voice trembling. What if they were never meant to be found? The pods, the other crew. Maybe they disturbed something, and that's why they never made it out. He was right. It was becoming clearer with every passing second that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. Whatever this place was, whatever purpose it had been hidden in the deepest part of the ocean for a reason. And now we had disturbed it. The walls shifted again, narrowing even more, forcing us into a tight passage. The air was damp, cold, and there was a faint metallic taste to it, like blood. The further we went, the stronger it got. I could feel it in the back of my throat, and every breath felt like it was growing harder to take. And then we reached another chamber. This one was smaller, more confined, but the walls, they were different, darker, covered in a strange, pulsing substance that almost looked like veins. They crisscrossed the room, glowing faintly with that same blue light we'd seen in the pods. In the center of the room there was something else, another pod, but this one was cracked open, its surface fractured, dark liquid seeping from the gaps. Mia stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. This one didn't stay asleep." She crouched near the pod, her scanner flickering as she waved it over the surface. "Captain, this is recent. Whatever was in here, it's out now." A cold knot twisted in my gut. The thing inside that pod wasn't hibernating anymore. It was awake, out there somewhere, moving through the facility. Watching us, maybe. James tensed, his grip tightening on his gear. "Do you think it's what took out the first crew?" "I don't know," I answered, though deep down I already had my suspicions. It wasn't just the other crew. It was us, too. We'd woken something up, and now it was hunting us. Suddenly, Mia's scanner beeped, the screen flickering with a spike in the readings. Her eyes widened. "There's something. It's moving." Fast, toward us. We didn't have time to react. The walls of the chamber began to tremble, a deep rumbling sound coming from the passage behind us. The lights flickered again, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something. Something massive, hunched, moving through the dark. It was fast, impossibly fast, its form too twisted, too unnatural to fully comprehend. "Go! Move!" I shouted, pushing Mia toward the nearest exit. We bolted into the corridor, our footsteps pounding against the floor, the sound of scraping metal and something wet, slick, growing louder behind us. The passage twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the maze, the walls continuing to shift as if the facility was trying to trap us. I could hear Will's breathing behind me, panicked, ragged. He wasn't going to last much longer. We had to find a way out, had to get back to the sub, but every turn we took seemed to bring us deeper into the facility. It was like it was leading us somewhere, pulling us in. The rumbling behind us grew louder, and then suddenly Will let out a scream. I whipped around just in time to see him fall, something dark and fast pulling him back into the shadows. His hand reached out, grasping for anything, for us, but he was gone before I could even blink. "Will!" Mia shouted, but it was too late. He was gone, dragged into the dark by whatever was following us. I grabbed Mia, forcing her forward. "We can't stop! Keep moving!" We ran, my mind racing, my heart pounding. Whatever was down here, whatever we'd woken, it was picking us off one by one. And now Will was gone. The passage finally opened up into another chamber, this one larger, colder. The lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the walls, and in the center of the room there was a door, a massive, sealed door, covered in the same strange, pulsing veins. It looked like it led deeper into the facility, but it was our only option. Mia was panting, her eyes wild, her face pale. What is this place?" I didn't answer. I didn't know. All I knew was that we were trapped, and whatever was behind that door might be the only way to survive. With trembling hands, I reached out and touched the door. It slid open with a hiss. The door slid open with a low, mechanical hiss, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. The air that rushed out was cold, stale, and carried with it a faint, metallic tang, as though the facility had been sealed for centuries, untouched by life until now. My breath caught in my throat as I hesitated at the threshold. Whatever lay beyond was deeper, darker, and more dangerous than anything we had encountered so far. But there was no turning back. Mia was beside me, her face pale, her breaths coming fast and shallow. She didn't say anything, didn't have to. We both knew what was at stake. Will was gone, and whatever had taken him wasn't far behind. If we stayed where we were, we'd meet the same fate. With a final glance at the pulsating walls behind us, I stepped through the doorway. Mia followed close, her grip tight on the scanner as it flickered weakly, struggling to pick up the facility's erratic signals. The door slid shut behind us with a heavy thud, cutting off the rumble of the shifting corridors outside. The room we entered was massive, far larger than anything we had seen before. It was a dome-like structure, the ceiling arching high above us, disappearing into the shadows. The walls were covered in the same strange, organic substance, but here it was thicker, more prominent. Long, sinewy veins crisscrossed the surface, pulsing in rhythm with the low hum that filled the space. It was like the whole room was alive, a part of whatever ancient intelligence controlled the facility. At the center of the room stood a massive structure, a monolithic pillar stretching from the floor to the ceiling, covered in symbols and markings that I couldn't begin to comprehend. The pillar pulsed faintly, glowing with the same eerie blue light that we'd seen in the pods, and surrounding it, at the base, were more pods. Dozens of them, clustered together in a perfect circle, their surfaces smooth and dark, like the ones we had seen earlier, but larger. These were different, more dangerous. I felt Mia step closer, her voice barely a whisper. "This is it, isn't it? The heart of the facility." I nodded slowly, my eyes scanning the room, taking in the alien architecture, the strange rhythmic pulsing that seemed to be in perfect sync with something deep and ancient. "This is what the other crew found," I said quietly. "They must have disturbed it." Mia's scanner beeped, the screen flickering erratically as she moved closer to the pillar. "There's energy here, massive amounts of it. This thing, it's not just a machine, Captain. It's alive." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made everything feel more real, more terrifying. We weren't just inside an ancient facility. We were inside something living, something far beyond our understanding. And we had woken it up. Mia crouched near one of the pods, her hands trembling as she scanned its surface. The readings were unlike anything we had ever seen. "Captain, these pods, they're connected to the pillar. It's like they're feeding off it." I didn't want to ask the question that was burning in the back of my mind, but I had to. "Feeding what?" Mia swallowed hard. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not just power. It's something biological. Something alive." I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, heavier than the ocean above. We were in the heart of something monstrous, something far beyond the scope of human comprehension. The other crew, they hadn't stood a chance, and now it was clear we were running out of time. The low hum that had filled the room began to rise in pitch, growing louder, more insistent. The pods at the base of the pillar started to pulse faster, the blue light flickering as something stirred within them. I could see it now, the faint shapes moving inside, like shadows shifting just below the surface. They were waking up. "We need to move," I said, my voice tight. "Now!" Mia stood up, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. We both knew what was coming. We turned back toward the door, but before we could reach it, the ground beneath us shook violently. The entire facility seemed to shudder, the walls vibrating with a deep, resonating rumble. The floor cracked beneath our feet, and a loud mechanical sound echoed through the chamber, like the groan of something ancient and immense, stirring from a long slumber. The pods began to open. The nearest one cracked down the middle with a loud hiss, releasing a rush of icy air. The thing inside stirred, its massive, twisted form shifting in the dark as it slowly rose from its slumber. It was impossible to fully see it in the dim light, but I could make out its elongated limbs, its slick, sinewy skin glistening in the faint blue glow. Its eyes, or the places where eyes should have been, were dark and hollow, like bottomless pits. It moved with a jerking, unnatural speed, its body contorting as it unfolded itself from the pod. The low, guttural growl that came from its throat sent a wave of primal fear through me. This thing, this creature wasn't just alive, it was angry. "We have to run!" Mia screamed, her voice shrill with terror. But there was nowhere to go. The room trembled again, and I could hear the other pods beginning to open, the things inside waking, stretching, and rising. The air was thick with the sound of their guttural growls, their twisted limbs scraping against the floor as they moved toward us. I grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her away from the advancing creature. "This way!" I shouted, leading her toward the far side of the chamber, away from the pods, away from the things stirring in the dark. There had to be another way out. There had to be. We sprinted across the chamber, the ground shaking beneath us, the air thick with the sound of hissing, groaning metal. The creatures were closing in, their movements fast and erratic, their forms shifting in the shadows as they advanced. I could feel their presence behind us, the oppressive weight of their anger, their hunger, pressing down on us like a physical force. Just as we reached the far wall, I saw it, a small opening, half hidden behind a cluster of cables and debris. A narrow passage leading down into the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was the only chance we had. "Go!" I shouted, pushing Mia toward the passage. She hesitated for only a second before diving into the dark, and I followed close behind, the sound of the creatures growing louder, closer, as they descended on the chamber behind us. The passage was tight, the walls slick with moisture, the air thick and stale. We crawled through the narrow space, the sound of the creature's guttural growls echoing behind us, growing fainter as we moved deeper into the tunnel. But even as we crawled through the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't escaping. We were being led somewhere. The tunnel seemed endless. We crawled through the narrow, claustrophobic space, our lights flickering in and out, barely illuminating the slick, damp walls ahead. Every breath felt heavier, the air thick with an unnatural dampness, and the sound of the creatures behind us was growing fainter. But I knew better than to think we were safe. The silence wasn't comforting. It was oppressive, suffocating. It felt like the facility itself was alive, like we were moving through the veins of some colossal being that had just begun to stir. Mia was ahead of me, her breathing ragged and fast. She hadn't spoken since we dove into the tunnel, and I could feel her terror radiating through the darkness. But there was no time to stop, no time to process what had happened. All we could do was move forward, deeper into the unknown, hoping, praying that this tunnel would lead us out. But the deeper we went, the more I realized we weren't escaping. The walls were changing. The smooth metallic surfaces we'd seen in the earlier corridors had shifted, replaced by something organic, something almost flesh-like. Long tendrils of the strange pulsing material snaked along the walls, glowing faintly in the dark, pulsating in rhythm with the low hum that seemed to permeate the air. "This isn't right," Mia finally whispered, her voice shaky. "This place, it's not just a facility, it's alive." I didn't answer. I didn't have the words. She was right, though. The place had changed the moment we woke those creatures, as if it had been dormant, waiting for something or someone to activate it. And now it was awake, and we were trapped inside its labyrinth. We reached a slight incline, and Mia pulled herself up first, her body trembling with the effort. As I climbed up behind her, I noticed the tunnel was opening up again, the walls widening, the organic growths spreading across the surface like veins. There was light ahead, faint but steady, and the hum in the air was growing stronger. When we emerged from the tunnel, we found ourselves in another chamber, smaller, more confined. But the ceiling was high, arched, like the ribcage of some ancient beast. The walls were covered in the same strange, pulsating material. But there was something different about this place. The air was colder, sharper, and there was a strange smell. Something metallic, mixed with decay. It clung to the back of my throat. Mia looked around, her eyes wide with fear. "Where are we?" I scanned the room, taking in the twisted cables and organic growths that snaked up the walls. In the center of the chamber was something else, something massive, covered in thick, dark cables that seemed to pulse with life. It looked like a machine, but it was intertwined with the organic material, as if the two had fused into one. Mia stepped forward cautiously, her scanner beeping softly in her hand. "This isn't just machinery, it's part of the facility, like it's all connected, and the readings—" She trailed off, her eyes locked on the display. "Captain, this thing, it's processing something. It's alive." The realization hit me like a wave of ice. This wasn't just some forgotten facility on the ocean floor. It was a living organism, an ancient machine designed for some purpose we couldn't even begin to understand. The pods, the creatures, they weren't just dormant inhabitants. They were part of whatever this place was. And now it was fully awake. "What's it processing?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Mia's face went pale as she glanced up from the scanner, her voice barely a whisper. "Organic material. It's processing life." I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. We weren't in a facility, we were in a feeding ground, a place designed to harvest, to consume. The creatures we'd seen, the ones that had taken will, they weren't just biological anomalies. They were products of this place. And now that we had woken them, the entire structure was coming alive, hungry. Mia's scanner beeped again, the readings spiking wildly. "Captain, we need to leave, now!" But before we could move, the walls trembled again. This time, the vibrations were stronger, more violent, and the low hum in the air grew louder, almost deafening. The entire chamber seemed to pulse, the veins along the walls glowing brighter, as if the facility itself was reacting to our presence. It was aware of us. No, it had been aware of us the entire time. We weren't intruders, we were prey. The cables in the center of the room began to shift, the dark, twisted forms unraveling as something massive began to emerge from the center of the machine. At first it was just a shadow, but as it rose, its form became clear. It was larger than the creatures we'd seen before. its body slick and twisted, its limbs long and spindly, almost mechanical in nature. Its face, or what passed for a face, was featureless, smooth, and dark, except for the faint glow of its hollow eyes. Mia let out a gasp, stumbling back as the creature rose to its full height, towering over us. It moved slowly, deliberately, its limbs creaking as it stepped forward, its head tilting slightly as if studying us. The air grew thick with the sound of its breathing, low and guttural, like the very facility was inhaling through it. "Run!" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my chest. "Run!" We bolted for the tunnel, but the creature moved faster than I thought possible. Its long, twisted limbs shot out, slamming into the ground just inches from where we stood, sending a shock wave through the floor. The walls shook violently, and I could hear the sound of more things moving in the darkness, echoing from the corridors behind us. I grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her toward the only other exit, a small opening in the far wall. Hidden behind a cluster of debris, we sprinted for it, the ground shaking beneath us, the sound of the creature's movements growing louder, more frantic. It was chasing us, its massive body crashing through the chamber as it followed, and I could feel the weight of its presence bearing down on us. We reached the passage just as the walls seemed to collapse behind us, the creature's massive form crashing into the debris with a deafening roar. We scrambled through the tight space, the air thick with dust and debris, and for a moment I thought we might actually make it. But the passage was narrowing, the walls closing in as the facility continued to shift around us. The tunnel ahead was barely wide enough for us to crawl through, and I could hear the faint scraping sound of something moving behind us, something following us through the dark. I didn't dare look back. "Mia, keep moving!" I shouted, pushing her forward as we crawled through the tight space, the walls pressing in closer, the sound of the creature's guttural breathing growing louder, closer. We were being funneled again, deeper into the heart of the facility, and with every step I felt the cold grip of dread tightening around me. There was no way out. The walls were closing in, tighter and tighter with every step. The tunnel twisted and turned, and each corner felt like it led us deeper into something worse, something far beyond the reach of human understanding. Mia's breathing was ragged, frantic, and I could hear the scrape of her boots against the slick floor as she pushed forward, desperate for an escape that I was beginning to realize didn't exist. The air was thick, stifling, as if the very atmosphere was closing in around us. The deeper we went, the more the walls seemed to pulse, like we were moving through the belly of some great ancient beast. It was no longer just a machine, no longer just a facility. This place, whatever it was alive, aware of us. And it had been from the moment we set foot inside. Behind us, the faint sound of movement echoed through the passage, slow, deliberate. The thing that had chased us through the chamber was still there, still following, though it no longer seemed in a hurry. It didn't need to be. It had all the time in the world, and we were trapped in its domain. Mia stumbled, catching herself against the wall, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. "Captain, what do we do? Where do we go?" I didn't have an answer. The tunnel ahead was narrowing again, the walls squeezing closer, almost like they were forcing us in a specific direction. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't an escape, that we were being funneled, herded into a corner like prey. But there was nowhere else to go. We couldn't go back. "We keep moving," I said, though my voice sounded hollow, even to me. We find a way out, but deep down, I knew there wasn't one. The passage finally opened up into a small, circular chamber. The walls here were different. slick and glistening, covered in a thick pulsing membrane that made my skin crawl. The air was colder, sharp and metallic, and there was a strange, almost rhythmic sound coming from the walls. A heartbeat, slow and steady, as if the entire structure was alive and breathing around us. Mia stepped forward, her voice shaking. This is the center, isn't it? The heart!" I didn't need to answer. It was obvious. We had been led here, guided by the shifting tunnels, by the living walls. This place wasn't just a facility, it was a trap, and we were standing in its core. The low rhythmic hum grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel it in my bones, vibrating through the floor. The walls around us began to pulse, faster now, the light from our suits flickering as the air grew colder, more oppressive. It felt like the entire chamber was closing in, like it was suffocating us. "We need to leave," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising hum. "We can't stay here." But as she turned back toward the tunnel, the walls shifted. The passage behind us sealed itself, the membrane stretching over the opening like skin over a wound, trapping us inside. Mia let out a gasp, stumbling back as the realization hit her. No, we're trapped! Captain, we're—" Her voice was cut off by a low, guttural sound that echoed through the chamber. The air around us grew still, the hum fading into a deep, resonating silence. And then, from the shadows, something moved. The creature stepped into the light, its massive form slick and twisted, its limbs long and spindly, like something that had never seen the surface, never felt the warmth of the sun. Its face, or what passed for a face, was smooth, featureless, except for the faint glow of its hollow eyes. It moved slowly, deliberately, its head tilting as it studied us, as if curious. Mia backed away, her hand trembling as she raised her scanner, but the device flickered and died in her grip. "Captain, what is that?" she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that whatever this thing was, it wasn't here to let us go. It had waited, slept for centuries, maybe longer, and now it was awake. The creature moved closer, its long, twisted limbs scraping against the floor as it advanced. The air grew colder, and I could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on us like a physical force. It was feeding off us, our fear, our helplessness. This place. It thrived on it. Mia screamed, backing away, but there was nowhere to run. The walls had sealed us in, trapping us in this living, breathing prison with the thing that had been waiting for us all along. I grabbed Mia's arm, pulling her behind me as I faced the creature. "We can't fight it," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "There's nothing we can do." She looked up at me, her eyes wide, pleading. "There has to be a way out! There has to be!" But there wasn't. Not anymore. The creature was just inches away now, its hollow eyes locked on mine, its form towering over us, casting long, twisted shadows across the walls. I could feel the cold seeping into my skin, into my bones. This was the end. We had been lured here like the others, like the crew before us. And now we were part of the cycle. Mia collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. "I don't want to die here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, Captain, I don't want to die." I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, that we had already lost. The creature moved closer, its cold breath washing over us, and I felt it, the slow creeping pull of something deeper, something ancient, reaching out from the shadows. It was more than just hunger. It was a force beyond our comprehension, a purpose we could never understand. And then the lights went out. The last thing I heard was Mia's scream, cut short by the dark, swallowed by the silence. And then there was nothing